Today on the Missions Podcast, while our eyes were glued to the news, a deadly cyclone devastated India and Bangladesh. So what happened to the believers, churches, and missionaries there?
Right now, because of the cyclone, there are many people who are homeless. It's become very hard because people are not being able to meet for church. Those are the places that are really unreached by the gospel.
Our friend Smita Singh returns to the Missions Podcast today in 1 minute. But first, a word from ABWE President Paul Davis.
ABWE missionaries are coming beside the lost and the hurting around the world. And through the Global Gospel Fund, they're pulling people from the darkness and training them as leaders. They're planting churches, and they're even beginning their own missions movements. You may already support one ABWE missionary. Would you consider a gift to the Global Gospel Fund to support all 1,000 of our missionaries? Thank you for that.
Become a partner today at abwe.org/Global Gospel Fund. Welcome to the Missions Podcast, the show that explores your hard questions on missions, theology, and practice to help goers think and thinkers go. I'm Alex Copeland, Director of Advancement Mobilization for ABWE International, joined by Scott Dunford, West Coast Mobilizer for ABWE and Lead Church Planter for Redeemer Church in Fremont, California. Scott, we enjoyed some time catching up before we hit record this morning and talking about things that we agree with, things that we maybe don't agree with, but things that are happening in our nation. And I think all of us have been glued to the news, the social media, for those of us that are in the U.S. And I'm grateful that we can take just a step back from that and also recognize that the kingdom of God is bigger than the United States of America. Right.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. It's really easy to just focus on what we see around us on the news and social media, and it really is designed to kind of become an echo chamber of horrors and yeah, there's a lot going on around the world, a lot of beauty and good things that God is doing in the middle of the darkness, and it's good to take a second and reflect on those things.
Yeah. We and one of the things that we also recognize is that while we're in crisis here in the West, and for those of us that are affluent, you know, when there's chaos in the streets or when there's an order from a governor that says, you know, all right, everybody stay at home now, you know, many of us, not all of us, but many of us have the privilege, and it is a privilege, of being able to, you know, telecommute, do church online. I mean, things like that. And there's problems with all of that, but it certainly affects us differently. But one of the things that we saw happen several weeks ago now is the super cyclone hitting a big part of the nation of India and South Asia, and recognizing that the developing world deals with disasters much differently, and that affects ministries differently as well.
Right. And so I'm really excited to introduce a guest that is no stranger to our show. She was actually one of our favorite interviews when we had Smita Singh on a while back. If you haven't listened to that interview about trauma and about sexual trauma in adolescence, it was powerful.
Yeah.
But we're excited to have Smita back on our show. Smita is the Director of Justice Initiatives at JKPS and the Mahima Homes, and we'll talk a little bit more about those in Calcutta, India. It's one of those places that has, I've never been there, but has captured my imagination since I was a young boy and reading stories of William Carey. And really excited to have you on the show today, Smita. So thank you for coming on. Welcome. And how are you doing?
Thank you, Scott. I'm doing well. And yes, thank you for having me back on the show again.
So May 20th is when the super cyclone hit Kolkata, and it hit you guys hard. So how did that affect you and your ministry?
In a big way, because even prior to that, we had been struggling with the COVID-19, and our whole state and country had been in lockdown for almost 2 months. And many people that we work with, and our primary work of going out into the villages with the gospel, that could not happen. Many of our people that we work with are daily wage earners, and they never had food to eat. We had been doing a lot of relief with providing just meals to them, and so that they could just live during this period of lockdown. And then comes the super cyclone, and it hit us for the first time, I think, in about 60 or 70 years. It was really, really the strongest cyclone that we've ever faced. And as a result, it completely devastated the city of Calcutta, but more so in the coastal areas where JKPS has been working for many years. And especially the two districts that are south and north of Calcutta and bordering Bangladesh and by the coast, they are anyway very, very vulnerable each time that we have any kind of a storm or cyclone, because the salt water comes completely inland and it destroys any kind of agriculture that can happen for years now. So the super cyclone not only destroyed people's homes, there was extensive flooding, there was a lot of damage to property, and the land now is, you cannot have any agriculture now for at least the next 3 years. So that was the worst situation, that already they were in such a bad situation with the lockdown and not having money and employment. And added to that is that even their shelters were gone. Places that they were staying in was just razed to the ground. So that's how it just completely impacted our area.
And I follow you on Facebook, and I just want to commend that to anyone who's listening and has enjoyed listening to our interviews with Smita. Like, I love the stories you put on there about people's lives being changed, but also there was pictures that you posted of the boys' home and the girls' home and the roofs being torn off and just the devastation. What has been the devastation like in the ministries where you're working?
Okay, so in the city, like I said, the boys' home that we have for boys who are children of women who were in the sex trade, and their house was completely destroyed. So we praise God that because of the COVID virus and as per government directives, the children were not there. They were there with their mothers, and so they were safe. But that entire house is now completely gone, and we need to rebuild that. The girls' homes were damaged, but because it's mostly the roofs that were damaged, and we need a lot of repair there. But there was, again, nobody was hurt. Everybody was safe with that. What we have lost out on a lot in the districts is that churches that we had built, church buildings, and they are not like church buildings like you have in the US. So they were smaller places with tin sheds as a roof and, asbestos around walls. So we've lost a lot of the churches that JKPS had built, where people used to come to hear the word every Sunday, and our evangelists and our people could go out and speak to them. So we do not have those. So they've completely been razed to the ground. So now again, to rebuild those churches for these people, it's going to take a while.
What do you do with a house full of boys when there's no roof? Do they still live in the house without a roof, or they go with other families?
No. So they're right now with their families, but they will be coming back since the lockdown's been lifted. We have another building on the premise. So we had 3 buildings there. We have one, which is our Bible Training College, which is a full concrete building. That stands fine. We had another house built there, which we're waiting on to start. It was going to be a home for girls in this, because it's a separate district from Calcutta. It's the neighboring district of South 24. So that building is empty. So they will be coming and staying there while we rebuild their house again, which will take anything from 6 to 8 months.
So we don't want to assume that all of our listeners have yet heard that first conversation we had with you. That was back in 2018. We'll link to it in the show notes. But last time we spoke, we talked about the trauma, the sexual abuse suffered from those that are caught up in human trafficking, the impact that has on adolescents, boys and girls, people that you're caring to, that you're bringing the gospel to and discipling. Can you remind our listeners, what are you doing? What is the work of JKPS and justice initiatives and the things you're involved in?
Right. So JKPS on a whole, the organization, which we work on 4 main areas. So one area is to bring the gospel to unreached people groups. The second is that of more of training. So we have our Bible training colleges, and discipleship programs for common people so they can learn the word even more. And then we train evangelists to go out and plant more churches and take the word out. The third is our ministry to our children, and that is through our sponsorship programs, where we sponsor education of children in the slum areas and help them to get on with their education. We also do a lot of VBSs and access a lot of children through that. Almost 12 to 18,000 children per year attend our vacation Bible schools every year. So it's the fourth area that I look after, which is the justice initiatives. And 10 years ago, JKPS for the first time got involved in this work through the setting up of a rehabilitation home, an aftercare home for minor girls who are being rescued out of the sex trade. So Calcutta is a big hub for sex work and prostitution and trafficking, simply because of its location. And so because of the large number of minors, the demand is for minor girls in our country. So as the law does not allow, of course, for children to be abused, so when they were being rescued, they did not have a good place to go to, which was going to teach them that or expose them to Jesus as well. So Mahima Home was the first Christian aftercare home in all of our eastern side in West Bengal. And since then, we have expanded to have 4 homes. And we have one home for minor girls being rescued after the sex trade. We have a home for adult women who are choosing to come out of the sex work and wanting to have a different life. So we help them with job readiness and getting them back into society with employment. We have 2 homes for minor boys and girls. These are children who have been either sexually abused or they are children who've been trafficked but younger than 14 years of age. So these children live in 2 other homes. So these are the 4 homes that we run that are residential. And we have another center in the largest red light area of Calcutta called Sonagachi, where we have close to 100 children who are children of sex workers who come to us every evening when their mothers are having their customers, so that they're away from witnessing what goes on in the brothels, because they live there. That is where their home is. But we try to provide them, encourage them to look at their education, keep them in school, expose them to therapy which they need, provide them with other skills like computers and English, and if they want to learn dance. So we have a big program that's going there, which is our prevention program. So all of this taken together is what the Justice Initiatives is all about.
Just a couple things, right?
Small ministry.
It is amazing what you are doing and what's happening there. And I have other friends that have been involved in that work, and they speak so highly of you particularly. So like I mentioned before, even since I was a kid, hearing stories of William Carey, Calcutta was a place that was on my young Christian imagination. And then later on, well, not later on for me, but later on in Christian history, you have Mother Teresa and her ministry there. So people have heard of Calcutta. They've heard about a lot of the things that have gone on there. It's been a part of the Christian imagination in the West for many years, even when maybe Westerners don't know anything else about India other than just what they've heard from those stories or from what they've read. So what is unique about Calcutta? What's part of it? What's the DNA about that city that's made it, a hub for sex trafficking and made it notorious in other ways? So can you tell us a little bit about the city and what makes it Calcutta?
Sure. So Calcutta and prostitution, they kind of go hand in hand. Prostitution has been very much an accepted part of our culture for hundreds of years. But when Calcutta got set up was when we had the Britishers who first came to us, early 1500s, 1600s. So they came first as traders and they came to Calcutta and they set up there. And in India, you will find that most of the religious places of pilgrimage of the Hindu faith or whether it's Islamic faith, wherever they have their big temples, there's usually a brothel area alongside it. And same with Calcutta. Calcutta is named after the goddess Kali. And they have a big temple of her in Calcutta, which kind of Calcutta centers around that temple. And the first brothel area started there. And then as the Britishers got more, they started settling in and staying in Calcutta, they realized that, they took control of the country, that their soldiers were placed in Calcutta. And many of the soldiers were, just going to various prostitutes randomly and ending up with a lot of disease, which they were carrying back with them to England. So in order to regulate that, they set up these designated red light areas where they tried to keep the women who were there clean so that their men did not get infected. So that is how we started having these very specific red light areas all over Calcutta and even all over India later on. But Calcutta being between Bangladesh and Nepal soon became even a transit point and a destination point for cross-border trafficking. So while there is this demand for girls within India, and they are being sourced from villages like where the cyclone hit, and that is the big fear now, is that because there will be no employment and no money, each time there is a national disaster like this, the number of children getting trafficked just kind of skyrockets. It happened in 2009 when we had another cyclone. Following that, we had this. And then again, when you had the Nepal earthquake, there was this big, huge number of Nepalese girls who were coming into India. So in that way, in Calcutta becomes a source, a destination, as well as a transit point. Almost whole demand for this is from our own people here. So we do not have any sex tourism. We do not have foreigners who are coming and creating a demand for us. So this has become very much an acceptable part of our culture. Not the abuse of children, that is definitely not acceptable, but legally or even with people who think that that is wrong. But there is a huge majority of men who would prefer to go to the red light area and find a young minor girl who would be abused by them. And they fetch the most amount of money. And as you grow older, naturally, the number of customers you get and the amount of money that you get comes down. So Calcutta in itself is, like I said, it's centered around the temple, and the red light area started there. They just got more structured and organized with the British period. And that still continues even today because they become a big vote bank. And the money that is generated there goes from the lowest person there to a taxi driver or a servant who works for them, right up to the level of the ministers and the police. So corruption is random there, and everybody is getting paid off. So nobody really wants to hit that place to stop it or close it in any way.
And there's so much there that has to do with worldview and has to do with the spiritual makeup of the city. And so I want to ask you about that. First, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with Smita Singh.
Hi, I'm Scott Dunford, and I would like to share with you about a new nonprofit ministry established to help churches, Christian schools, and other ministries protect children and prevent abuse. Rich Hamar from Church Law and Tax states that the #1 reason that drives churches to court is child sexual abuse. I can't think of anything more devastating to these lives, their families, and our witness before a watching world than sexual abuse that takes place in ministry. The traumatic impact often leaves the vulnerable not wanting anything to do with God or His people. Furthermore, as ministry leaders, our efforts toward evangelism, discipleship, and spiritual formation are not only neutralized, but shattered. Evangelical Council for Abuse Prevention was formed last year to help ministry leaders understand the complexities of child protection and abuse prevention. They are establishing standards and an accreditation program that will help verify that appropriate measures are in place at your church or ministry. Learn more about them and their good work at abuseprevention.org. Find a helpful and free assessment tool to help you see how you measure up in this area. Go to abuseprevention.org and click on the link for this resource assessment. Evangelical Council for Abuse Prevention. Pray for them and follow along for this accreditation program coming soon.
Brooks Buser, president of Radius International.
I am here with Mark Dever, senior pastor at Capitol Hill Baptist and president of 9 Marks. when you go to a culture that's a different language than yours, you're ending up in a kind of majority language that's been reached. And there are other peoples still more hidden, and it's those people who are often almost entirely unreached, and they take more cross-cultural effort. Is there a way we can better train people to have more realistic expectations of what life is like in the kind of 2 steps away from my culture, and be able to sustain family life with its normal difficulties there, so that there can be a long years and even decades-long witness in that culture? And it seems like Radius is set up to provide that training. Radius is about reaching unreached people groups.
Go to radiusinternational.org, radiusinternational.org.
Smita Singh, who is Director of Justice Initiatives for ABWE and Live Global's partner JKPS in Kolkata. So we were talking about this unique city that has captivated the Christian imagination, at least since William Carey, for many people, for people like Scott. And you're talking about the corruption. You're talking about the acceptability of the red light districts and of not necessarily child sex abuse, but certainly the cultural acceptability of prostitution. What is the dark spiritual underside of that, right? We know that we live in a world of principalities and powers, but you'd also look at that and you would say, like, well, I would assume that Hinduism, Islam, some of the other religious groups are going to have teachings against things like prostitution. And maybe that's an assumption, but what role does religion play there in this city named after the god of destruction within the Hindu system?
Right. So even if you look at the Hinduism and you see their mythology and stories about their gods, you will see that they always had these women who would be in the courts of the gods, who were there to pleasure the gods. And that kind of leads down to the temples, where you would have young girls who were being put into the temples to satisfy the gods, but were being abused by the priests who were there. So they were called the Devadasis. So they were supposed to minister to the gods in the temples, but it was just another way of abusing these women. So it's been acceptable through their religion as well. And for them to know that, okay, women are there to entice, seduce, help men feel better about themselves. Second thing that their religion teaches them about fate, and that what you've done in your last life is what is going to play out in your this life. So when we have talked to women who've been trafficked and have been there for a long time, and we try to encourage them that, do you want to leave? Do you want to come out of this? And they would always say that, this is our fate. We cannot get out of this. So there is that sense of resignation that we don't deserve any better, because the sins of my past that's why I am here. So that is another thing that is a very difficult cycle to get them to break out of. So both these things together is this deep-seated belief that the role of the woman and how that plays out with fate coming into that, both kind of impacts the reason why this continues to go. So
Christianity has been in India almost since the beginning, but Calcutta is on the other. It's on the east side of India. It has its own unique history and culture there. What is the Christian community currently like in Calcutta?
It's a very small community. It's a very small percentage of people. Numbers might be more than maybe you have in a city, but in Calcutta, we have 14 or 15 million people here. So in that case, 2% of that or 2.5% of that are Christians. Even in that, they are divided into Catholic groups, and then you have your mainline churches, and then you have your more evangelical independent churches. So you have a group of Christians who are living out their faith and trying to take the word out to people. And Hinduism is a religion that kind of accepts everybody, because they have so many hundreds and thousands of gods. So to them, Jesus is just one other God. And they are very tolerant of that. And they would say, oh, we also pray to Jesus, but also pray to Jesus with my other 1,000 gods. So in that way, the Christian community is so small, and they are having to, kind of keep their identity. It becomes really tough for them, and it's a challenge because you have so many people of other faiths that you're surrounded with. I live in a whole apartment complex, and I think that, maybe in the close 2 kilometers in my area, there is no other Christian family. So I'm the only one. So for me to,
Wow.
walk my faith and share that and be able for people to know that I'm Christian and why am I different, it takes a lot. And a lot of times, even Christian families find it difficult to walk against that pressure that they feel surrounded by all of them. But I'd like to say that despite of that, I think our community is pretty much close. We have some great leaders here, and we have some good leadership in leading some of the churches. There is not a lot of, I would say, collaboration, especially between the mainline churches, but the smaller churches, I think there is a greater, what I see is a greater kind of coming together and sharing and being able to lead together so that there is a sense of unity in the whole community at large.
Now, digging just a little bit deeper into the role of JKPS, your ministry in the Mahima Homes, and how that ties into the church. Yeah. By the way, just to confirm real quickly, your family history, your family was initially exposed to the gospel through William Carey. Is that right?
My father's family was.
And that's a fantastic piece of this, because this isn't just something happening that's separated from what happens in the West. We have to, this is all because of a legacy of missions and, every nation being able to become a sending nation and take that message out. But you're talking about how some of these initiatives are promoting the church. And yet you're saying these churches have been closed now because of the cyclone and pretty much razed to the ground. Are they meeting? Are they still able to meet at all? What are they doing?
No. So the ones in the villages, they're not being able to meet because they don't have this technology and online church and stuff. In the city, yes, most of the churches are going online and we can still worship together. But in the village, that is not possible. So that is where, and even now, after so many days of the cyclone, even now places are very inaccessible. There's still a lot of waterlogging. There is a lot of flooding. So even our people are unable to reach. Up until last week, I think we couldn't even contact people by phone. So we had no idea that whether we had lost anyone or what was the damage done. So yeah, it's become very hard because people are not being able to meet for church in the rural areas where JKPS primarily works, because those are the places that are really unreached by the gospel. Most of them are islands that are part of the delta of West Bengal. And so getting there and accessing them is very, very tough. They don't have power. They don't have, good drinking water. They don't have anything that we take for granted when we are in the city.
So can you tell us a little bit about what are the current needs you have? I mean, we've seen, I've seen online, certainly we've talked about the devastation, but what are the current and future needs of your ministry, and how can people that want to help?
The first thing is that because our work is about sharing the gospel, so, the main thing is the funding part of it that comes in, because we cannot access any of it locally. The government does not have any kind of funds for that. So most of the work that JKPS does with community development or taking the word out has been based on support that we have received from people overseas. And following this COVID-19 issues and the economic crisis all over the world, so that is definitely going to impact our ability to continue with our work that we are doing there. So that was the first and primary need. Right now, because of the cyclone, there are many people who are homeless. people do not have a roof, because most of them had very temporary houses and with maybe, tin roofs and stuff, which have all flown away. So helping them to rebuild their homes, we are trying to help with that. We are trying to help to rebuild our churches, which are really small meeting places where people can come and worship. We're also trying to rebuild, like I said, the boys' home and the girls' home, and repairing all the work that has been done. So these are our major needs immediately. But over this next year, I think that because of the financial crisis that's happened, we are probably having to look at how we can probably downsize even our justice work and our homes, because if we do not raise enough money to continue to run all the homes, then we will have to look at how we can think differently, but still continue to care for these children because we are committed to them, but how we can handle that, because I am anticipating a larger influx of more children who are going to be trafficked. And so we have to be ready for that.
Well, you have friends here, and we don't have an incredibly huge platform, but God's given us a bigger platform than we ever thought we did. And I know we have listeners, I know we have pastors who they may not have extra money, but they have the ability to take up a special offering. I mean, how can people support what you're doing and make sure that doesn't happen?
Yes, first of all, please keep us in prayer, because we just need that to cover us and our team and our staff as they work to help build. Because even as they go out to provide relief, they're always at risk to be infected by the coronavirus. So, being just able to keep them protected and safe, we just need a lot of prayers from everybody. And again, I think the Live Global, the Gap, through the Gap, you can support us. You can go on our website, you can see more about the work, get more updates as to what is going on with our relief efforts in Calcutta. And if you have any questions, they can contact us through our website and we can get back to them.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show today. Really grateful for you and your ministry. And if you are listening right now and you're interested in getting in touch with Smita and figure out how you can support, let us know. Alex@missionspodcast.com. Smita Singh with JKPS. Thank you so much for joining us today on the Missions Podcast.
Thank you so much, Alex.
To get more content, go to missionspodcast.com or check out abwe.org/podcast. If you like what you hear, please subscribe, rate, review, and share. To ask a question or suggest a topic, email alex@missionspodcast.com, and we'll see you next time on the Missions Podcast.